Chair Jack Foley,
Present.
Member D. Simone,
Present.
Scholl,
Here.
Executive Director Miguel Nunez,
Here.
Legal Counsel Ray McCarthy.
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Our first item is to discuss and vote on approving the minutes from our committee meeting from January 14th, 2025.
Make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve, second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Our second item is, the second item is to discuss and vote, potentially to vote to develop and recommend adoption of a compensatory time policy for board employees. Related to that, thank you, Miguel and staff, for including a copy. This is, the copy you have in front of us is, I think, what we actually talked about a long time ago, maybe. It's approaching 18 months. But this, I believe, starts from the Department of Administration's policy. We made some changes related to that. Thank you to Mr. Mercaccio for helping with that. That was quite a while ago, but this is what I think would be a good starting point for us to take a look at. A couple of things that I will note. Obviously, it refers to us, State Board of Elections. One of the things that the changes that in reference to the fact that in election year and the follow-up activity, sometimes it's difficult to be able to take that within 1 year. So we did make that change to make it an 18-month period after the compensatory time is earned, that an employee can take that time. And again, just in general, we put this together because we want something on paper, because with nothing, it cuts both ways. It can be open-ended, good for the employees, bad for the employees, good for the department, bad for the department. So putting something down just puts some structure around it. So do we have any questions or discussion points that are?
Randy, the exempt position compensatory time policy, you said it's from the Department of Administration?
I believe, yeah, we started with
I
that.
went online and I couldn't find it. And I went through their rules and regulations. I couldn't find anything. And I went through Title 36, Chapter 4 of the General Laws, and I couldn't find anything regarding this. So could we have a citation for this? And
Sure.
the complete policy they have with respect to employees?
I certainly could
Compensation time?
locate that. I did
Yeah,
quite a
my
while ago, but I literally
recollection-
went to the Department of Administration has a policies page. Actually, it's a state policies, and then you choose the Department of Administration, and then this was on there.
That's right. And it was, I think it was adopted in 2019, but it is a policy that I have seen on through the DOA. It's been quite some time since I've retrieved it. I can't tell you exactly where it is, but it is not for example, it's not a promulgated regulation. You wouldn't find it in any regulatory data. You would just find it with the policies that DOA keeps from time to time. And I think it was Michael DeBiase, who was the person who signed it on behalf of the DOA. So that was some time ago.
Well, it has to be at least 20 years.
Well, he was under Raimondo, and then I think it was right around 18 or 19 that he signed it on behalf of the department when he was running the department.
So I went online to try to find out what their policies was, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah,
So
okay.
Perhaps you can tell us what the link is. I can look at that.
Well, I'm happy to, after the meeting, obviously, or at a later date, share the link of where I found that. I honestly through a Google search. So, and then went through, that took me to the state website. But that notwithstanding, I think you'll find that basically this is the policy that you'll find there when I give you the link, obviously with any changes that are relevant to the State Board of Elections. Any thoughts or questions regarding the substance of the? Sure, of course.
I was just going to ask the executive director, Miguel, have you had a chance to look through this, and particularly with regard to accrual and the time periods? I mean, do they seem to make sense to you, or just, sort of a general commentary if you have one on it?
Yes, I did have a chance to review the policy, and I just think there are a few core a few core points within the policy that I think need to be looked at, such as the rate in this policy. It's a 1-per-1, and I believe in our current policy, which has been the policy in effect for decades, as far as I'm aware, is a 1 to 1.5 for comp time over 35 hours. I think that's something similar that's done with the Secretary of State's office as well, including in their elections division. So that would be something I think we should look at. And as far as the time,
Not to interrupt you, but is the 1.5 based upon time and a half, so to speak? Is that what it's based on? Or do you know?
essentially, but it's over 35 hours. So so you could work 3 days of 10 hours a day, and you're not going to get any comp time for that. Or 12-hour days for 3 days, and you wouldn't get any comp time. But if you go over 35 hours in a work week, then it is comp time, because we work 8 to 4. It's in a 1-hour lunch. So it's a 7-hour work day, 5 days a week, 35 hours. So we could actually remove the language here on 40 hours, because there are some positions in state government that have a 40-hour. That's why that's probably in there regarding 40 hours. But everyone at the Board of Elections is on a 35-hour work week classification. And I also think that we'd have to look at the maximum, because 70 hours is not something that I don't think would be possible for the staff, because after a statewide primary, for example, many staff members would accrue 70 hours in a primary. So they wouldn't have time to discharge it by the general election, because as soon as the primary is over, we're rolling right into the general election. So we have to figure out a time frame to be able to discharge any time, because that 70-hour max will be hit pretty quickly. So anyone that essentially, if someone hit that 70-hour max in the primary, we'd be at jeopardy of losing that person beyond any 35-hour work week, because they're at their max.
I'm sorry, on that point, what do you think thinking of both the primary and general, what would be, or what's the average amount of comp time you think would be
That's what
reasonable?
I wanted to look at. I wanted to look at what the average was over the last few election cycles to kind of determine what's the average that's built up in a primary to a general, to get a good idea of how much time would it take to discharge a certain amount of time that they would typically accrue. And I also think that some flexibility for myself or for the board to extend any time frame in any mitigating circumstances, because as we know, there are years where it's tremendous. It's a tremendous effort to pull the election off, such as in 2024, and some years might require more time than others. So obviously, more time would be needed to have it discharged, so the staff does not end up losing it. And I didn't see any mention here about any existing time that is accrued. So I would think we would need to figure out how to grandfather in or allow some sort of time frame for any existing time to be discharged. There is no time being accrued at this time. It's usually only accrued during the election years, in those months between July and November, for example. So obviously there is quite a bit of time until the next election cycle for any time that is currently accrued to be discharged.
So I agree that there should be some language in here with mitigating circumstance for you to have the flexibility to, in hopefully rare cases, to waive the time frame to give somebody an additional like 6 months or 12 months or whatever. And I also think, do you think the 18 months is adequate? We could also think about doing it the next full calendar year? Like, for example, anything that was accrued last year could be taken through December 31st of this year. You know what I'm saying? So 2024's election, you accrued a certain amount, you can take it through the following year. Since it's generally that flow where it's year on, year off.
I think that would be fine, but I would just want to look at the accrual, as I said, to see if I thought that would be a sufficient amount of time. It seems reasonable to me on its face, but I think I would want to see the numbers to just make sure that there would be enough time. Because I don't want to have something that's too short and then I have to be getting requests to extend it. I would like something that's in the middle that it's fair to the employee, to the staff, and also to the agency, so they have enough time to discharge it, but it's not something that's extended too far out.
Yeah,
So,
True.
so at the present time, everybody works a 35-hour work week.
Yes.
So for example, if during a particular week, the employee works 40 hours, so that's five extra hours.
Correct.
What do they accrue as far as comp time?
7.5.
Okay. And that's based on if we had to pay overtime, we would be paying time and a half.
Exactly.
That's what the Fair Labor Standards Act says. Anything over 35 or 40-hour work week is time and a half, okay, whether it's Sunday, holidays, or overtime. But, the Board of Elections is a special agency in the state because you work a lot of hours during a compressed time period, especially during the election cycle. And on the non-election years, there's really nothing to do. And for us to go around and say those employees who are working long hours during an election cycle, we can't afford to pay them time and a half, okay? Just blow the budget. So therefore, that's why we have the compensatory time during the non-election times. And for them to discharge that within 18 months, I don't think it's long enough. I mean, it should go out at least 24 months at the very minimum. But the idea is to keep the employees happy so they're willing to come here and work and put in the long hours. So I think we have to look to the executive director to come up with what he thinks would be an appropriate compensation time policy, and specifically the hours and how it's determined, what his supervisory position is going to be, because he can make exemptions, okay? And what is the maximum amount of hours they can accrue? So, I mean, you can have a maximum hours of, say, 400 hours. They can't go beyond that. So we have an upper limit. This is all something I think the staff should consider and look at, and then report back to the subcommittee as to what they.
So when you're thinking 100 hours, so are you thinking they can accrue 100 hours? So really, they would be accruing like at 1.5 for each, right?
Yeah, well,
They'd be
yeah.
accruing, so at 50 hours, they'd be at 75. They'd be about 75 hours. Okay.
Yeah, but to be a maximum upper limit, okay? They can't accrue above that, okay? I think 400 hours would probably be an upper limit. I mean, it's all,
400?
yeah, 400 hours, okay? That'll be the max, okay? But I think we'll leave it to the executive director to come up with what he think would be an appropriate maximum amount.
I mean, 400 hours though is a lot of time.
Yes, it is.
I mean, 350 hours is 10 weeks.
Yes, I understand. But we don't know how many hours they put in during the course of an election cycle either.
You'd be giving somebody basically 11 weeks off during the following year.
But they would have to work that time.
Say that again?
They have to work the basic
No,
time.
I understand that.
Yeah,
I understand that.
So
but
they
if
get
they're
nothing
gonna
for-
accrue 500 hours, or
Yeah.
400 hours.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's a lot of hours.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, Lou, the point is you can't have an open-ended.
Yeah.
So it has to be an upper limit.
Oh, I agree that
Yeah.
there has to be an upper limit.
Yeah.
so just a couple follow-up questions. I do agree. So if Miguel, if you could follow up and find out what the average is, so we could come up with, instead of just kind of throwing numbers out, because 400 hours would be 267 hours of comp time, 267 hours worked over 35, and then at 1.5, that would be 400 hours. So I'm sorry, I got a question on the time and a half. I understand the theory there, but this policy applies to exempt positions, not non-exempt, non-exempt being the hourly. So I actually don't know what the split is for exempt, non-exempt for permanent employees here. Do you happen to know what that is?
I do not believe there is a difference. Everyone is I'd have to get back to you, but I
So-
don't believe it's one or the other. I believe
Okay.
it's,
Oh,
I don't believe there's a mixture. It's
I think the statute would be 3642.
This is an exempt, it's exempt. I don't know of any person here who's working on an hourly basis, do we?
correct. No.
There's no hourly, these are all salaried employees.
Yeah, so generally, salary employees, to my knowledge, don't generally get hour, like time and a half. I recognize that we might work on that. I'm not familiar with the Fair Labor Standards Act, so does that specifically cite exempt employees getting time and a half?
Exempt, no, so nobody here gets time and a half under FLSA. That,
Okay.
there is no federal or state requirement for comp time, not for these positions. This is a benefit being considered outside of what the law requires.
Okay, thank you. That helps me to clarify. I certainly want, again, I think that the basis of this is just certainly make sure that the employees know what to expect, the department, the State Board of Elections knows what to expect. So I'm glad that we're having this open discussion about it. I would be worried about a 24-month, 18 months or even a little bit longer is fine with me, but 24 months would make me concerned because then you'd be going into the next election cycle. I think it's important that we encourage the employees to try to, like, on an off year, there is a lot going on still, I recognize that, but on an off year where there's no actual election, or maybe only a special election or something like that, there's a bigger opportunity to take that compensatory time. So we'd want to encourage that as much as possible. So, but I'm willing to talk about that timeframe. So I think we have a couple of follow-ups as far as I can.
And I
tell.
just to add into that,
Sure.
because we're talking about the categorization, they're on a even though they're not specifically salaried because they're on a 35-hour work week, but if they work fewer than 35 hours, they have to discharge some sort of time. So personal time, vacation time, sick time, or compensatory time. Also, we're non-standard, so we don't work a set schedule. The employees are required to work an open schedule in terms of during election time. So if they've hit their 35 hours by Thursday, for example, if it's not an election time, we would ask them not to come in on Friday, essentially, so they don't accrue any time. So we're proactive about that. So if it's not election time and there's something going on at the State House, for example, or there's an event during the week, or they're doing some sort of activity that's extending their hours during certain parts of the week, they wouldn't accrue comp time because we would ask them to not work one day that week in order to put it all into 35 hours into 4 days. So that's been my recollection since all my time here. Beginning when I started training, we would come in at 11 o'clock and leave at 9 o'clock, for example, to mitigate that time. That's become more difficult now with the amount of responsibility that's been added to the Board of Elections over the last 20 years, with electronic poll books and with the amount of equipment and the logistics that need to go into, and with the Help America Vote Act and all the requirements that come into that. So we do need the staff to be here during the day, but we also need them to be available in the evening for classes and to work into the warehouse and processing mail ballots that go into extended evenings for many weeks during election time.
And I just have another question. And I know some of the state workers are still on the hybrid schedule, work from home and work here. Do we have any workers working from home at this point?
No, we do not,
We do not.
unless it's mitigating circumstances. But we only worked from home for 1 week during COVID, and we were in the
No,
office
I
every single day.
remember during- we're all here. That's why
Yes.
I asked, so. I guess so it's a little different than if you're working from home. You are here when you're working.
Correct.
That's the issue.
Yep.
It's not a situation, I just wanted it to be clear that it's not a situation where people are accruing time and they're sitting in their
No.
homes. They're accruing compensatory time. So I think maybe would it be feasible for our next meeting to maybe look at what the average time is during
Yep.
during the election cycle, and then what the existing time is, and that way I think we'd have a better handle on time periods. That seemed like.
More than the average, you need the range.
Yep.
Of time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the
that's a good
range of
idea.
time.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And also by point out on the compensatory time, it's not taken as a bulk. They could take a day here, a day there, half a day here, a personal day. So it could be spread out over a whole year, or 2 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in the newer employees, and we have a lot of newer employees around here, they start off with minimal amount of vacation time, for example. So obviously they have more opportunities to use that compensatory time because they burn through their sick time and their vacation time pretty quickly. So certainly they do use that time. It's not something that accrues for a long period of time.
Just as another, and I know it's built in, but I think that the director should have the ability to say, well, yeah, you could take 10, but you can't take 20, depending on what you feel is, the appropriate amount. I think there should be some leeway for the director to determine whether or not he needs that person.
Yeah.
They may say, I need to discharge 35 hours and I'm going next week. And he says, well, I don't think you can do that.
Well, I think subject to the
That's something
direct,
that's gonna be up to
the director has to decide whether or not he's going to have the comp time or not. That's, he's the captain of the ship.
I'm just thinking we
He
should.
needs the
build-
crew
we should-
aboard, yeah.
We should sort of build that into the policy, I think.
Yeah, while we're here, perhaps we should look at what other state agencies or departments are doing for their comp time as well. So if you have a chance to take a look at perhaps Secretary of State or some other
Well,
agency.
Now that Rock came in, I think that they do have a policy.
Yeah,
and
well,
I think Miguel has a copy of that.
yeah, we could take a look at that policy
We could
too.
Probably look at that as well.
Certainly.
So I've got, I think I've logged 4 follow-ups. Number one, I'm going to send a link to the DOA policy where this generated from to the committee. Miguel, you're going to provide us the average time or the range or the different numbers related to how much comp time everyone accrued last year. I think we need to get some language in, two pieces of language in here. One, that comp time is subject to the approval of the executive director, that they can't, that it has to be approved before taken. And then we need some language in here just to talk about like extenuating circumstances where the executive director can approve the extension of the time limit, which is in section 5D. Ray, do you think that's something that those last 2 items that you would feel comfortable drafting some brief language on those 2
Sure,
things?
I could do that, yep.
Great, that'd be great. And then maybe what we can do is then take that back and actually, other thing I noticed, any reference to a 80 hours or a 40-hour work week would needs to be stricken from this. So, any other questions? That's so we can take it up at the next meeting. Great. Okay. Excellent. So we're going to move on to item number 3. We will potentially vote and discuss to recommend the adoption of modifications to job titles and compensation of staff. This is probably a very long discussion, but I know that you were going to provide us some background on the details of the last foray into this subject.
Yes, I have some details. It's still something that I am working on. As you know, this has been a process since probably late 2022 that's been ongoing. In Rhode Island General Law 17-7-6 allows the board to fix the salaries of its secretary, who is in effect the executive director, and his assistants, who are in fact the staff, with the amount appropriated for those salaries by the General Assembly. And sometime in early spring of 2023, the board had directed my predecessor, Bob Reposer, to begin working with the Department of Administration on reclassifying the positions at the Board of Elections to be specific to elections and campaign finance titles, which currently is not the case, and to determine if these salaries were in fact competitive with the Office of the Secretary of State's Elections Division, as well as other election departments in the region. And I know that in looking through Bob's research, I know that he was working with Tom Manick, the Deputy Personnel Administrator, for human resources, and for the Department of Personnel, and with George Rinaldi, the legal counsel for the DOA, to work on submitting a request to have a public hearing to the Division of Human Resources Review Board in May of 2023. Now, this process would have created these new job classifications that would have been unique to the Board of Elections, because we do share those titles with other agencies such as DCYF, DHS, for example. And the public, from what I can gather, the public hearing did not transpire because at some point it was determined that specific legislation would be needed to create these new job classifications. And I know that Bob, as I've researched this, he worked with our legal counsel, Ria Macarcio, to craft the appropriate legislation, which was approved by the board and submitted to the General Assembly, and eventually did not pass. There were concerns that it would not in effect do what the board it wanted it to do in terms of with the job classifications, even though Bob and legal counsel Marcasio did work with the Department of Administration to come up with that legislation. So in the end, it apparently needed to do, it wasn't going to do what we had hoped it would do. So it did not pass through the General Assembly. And now at this point, I'm still gathering through all the relevant communications because there are many, maybe hundreds of emails between Bob and the Department of Administration that outline this process. I'll soon be reaching out to the DOA to determine if this process can in fact proceed through the public hearing process, because that seemed to be the route it was going for the bulk of it until it was determined that legislation had to be implemented. So I'll certainly keep the committee updated on my progress, and I hope to have some additional information on that at the next meeting.
Chairman, just one question.
Yep.
For Ray, are we empowered, if it can't get before that board, are we empowered to create our own designations?
It's never been tested. So we have competing provisions, both one that Miguel cited that talks about the Board of Elections having its own authority to set the salaries of its secretary and the secretary staff. We have a competing provision that requires that all non-classified positions be approved by, at one point, the payroll board, which has,
It doesn't exist.
right, but that has been, those responsibilities are now with the Department of Administration. So the DOA has all of the powers that the board had, the payroll board had, with respect to setting those salaries for non-classified positions. There's a conflict. You could harmonize the two by saying that the authority of the board to set its salaries exists, but it must do so within the parameters of what the DOA sets. So that will be one way to at least have the salaries set in a certain range. But as far as titles, there's no case law. There's nothing where this board has attempted to go outside of the payroll board and the DOA to set that. It's that is within the authority of DOA under the statutes.
And is the only mechanism to get approval from DOA through that hearing process?
That's the only one that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Excuse me, let me ask a question. Is that a hearing at DOA you're talking about?
You mean, where is it located?
No.
Yeah,
It's
there's a panel that DOA has in place for,
We're talking about all this to set up the classification and asking permission and so forth, in the question of a hearing. So who would conduct the hearing? Would it be the board conducting the hearing?
this board? No.
Or the Department of Administration?
DOA
conducting?
would, I've never been before that body, but there is a body that sets the salaries, it fixes the salaries, and there's some kind of a public hearing with a body in place that determines those figures, those salaries. I've never been before it, so I can't really give you any details on that.
Yeah,
But it's certainly not this board.
I was just curious who
Yeah.
has the ultimate power on that.
I mean, if you look at 1776, you could argue that you do, and all of the power rests with this board. That's never been tested. I would think that a court would, like I said, would try to harmonize the competing positions from those two different statutory frameworks and say, you can set your salaries however you want to, so long as they fall within the broad parameters of what DOA has in place for its positions for the state.
Well, I guess we have to explore that a little bit more.
So, but I think as a follow-up for the next meeting, we can continue to have this on the agenda and get an update on information you found. I think baseline, we need a list, and it's changed probably. The staff has changed somewhat since 2022 and 23. So just get your recommendation in terms of what you think the title should be for the existing positions. And because regardless of where we go, whether we do it ourselves or whether we go to DOA or we go to payroll, well, somewhere else, HR board, we need that information. So
Yeah, and I should mention one other thing. I know, for example, the Ethics Commission, which is in even a more autonomous role than we are because it's set forth by the Constitution, they likewise follow what DOA has in place. They have not tried to bypass the parameters of the salary ranges that are set forth by DOA. So that's interesting that they likewise do that.
I wonder if the DOA has they may not have specifically defined ranges for election specific, although I guess if they're the Secretary of State's election division, they may.
They may,
don't
although
know.
I think that, so I think that's what Miguel is getting at, trying to create those positions that would be election specific within this system that DOA runs.
Correct. Okay. Any other questions or comments on that particular item? Okay. If not, the final item is to discuss and vote on the agenda items for the future meetings. And I think it's almost as if we have a standing agenda. So come back to those two items, 2 and 3, both the policy as well as the item we just discussed with the job titles and compensation. Do we need that as a vote, Ray, or is that acceptable to?
Yeah, if there's a motion required, I'll make a motion that we continue with the agenda similarly to the way it's set up and consider all those issues that the chairman just referenced
Okay.
as part of it.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Have a second? All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Right. With that, we finish our agenda. So motion to adjourn.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Say aye. So we're adjourned at 3:06 PM. Thank you.